Hey guys, today I'm going to be installing and reviewing the latest release of Gecko Linux, Gecko Linux 4.23 from distrowatch.com. Gecko Linux is an OpenSUSE-based spin which features non-free packages not found in OpenSUSE's default repositories. So think of Gecko Linux being similar in nature to what Linux Mint was for many years to Ubuntu, where Ubuntu didn't ship, third-party like drivers and multimedia codecs on its ISO by default, but Linux Mint did. It took Ubuntu and added all that third-party software and packaged it up in a nice package. It's similar to what Aurora does with Fedora. Fedora ships with free software only by default. Aurora, though, adds a bunch of non-free drivers and codecs and makes Fedora, more palatable to most desktop users. Gecko Linux is doing a very similar function for OpenSUSE. So this latest release, Gecko Linux 4.23, was released about 2 or 3 days ago. This new release is for the static versions of Gecko Linux only, not the rolling release versions. The rolling release versions are still, the latest snapshots of those are pretty old. I actually looked at the dates on them. Some of them are like 9 months old. So this new release is for the static release version, the ones based on OpenSUSE Leap, not the ones based on OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. So I'm going to download the static release version, the one based on OpenSUSE Leap. The desktop version, we have the options of Cinnamon, GNOME, LXQT, Mate, Plasma, or XFCE. I'm going to download the Cinnamon edition because it appears that the Cinnamon edition might be kind of Gecko Linux's flagship desktop. It's the one I see most of the time in screenshots on press releases and such. It's the one that appears first in their download page. So I'm going to download their Cinnamon edition and install this inside VirtualBox. Alright, and I've loaded up the ISO. In the boot screen we have the option of Gecko Linux Static Cinnamon. Basically that's just going to boot us straight into the live environment. We have the fail-safe mode, we have boot from hard disk, and we have media check. I'm just going to go ahead and boot directly into the live environment. And booting into the live environment may take a few minutes. One thing I'll mention about the boot screen, the splash screen, and everything, a lot of it still said OpenSUSE. You had the OpenSUSE logo. A lot of these distributions that are based on another distribution, many of them fail to, rebrand everything with their own name, their own logo, and I really wish more distros would take the time to do that. Just add a little bit of polish and professionalism to their product. And we're in the live desktop environment. This is Cinnamon here. We have a message here about software rendering mode. This is normal here in VirtualBox. Cinnamon, for some reason, always has some little issues, as always. Alright, so we have the Calamaris installer here on the desktop. Let me go ahead and launch it. I will mention that in the release notes for this particular version of Gecko Linux, it mentioned that you had 2 different installers you could use. The Calamaris installer, which is the recommended installer, but if you wanted to, you could use the old YAS2 live installer as well. The other thing I noted about this particular version of Gecko Linux is it didn't require a username and password to log into the live session and run the installer. They got rid of that from their previous versions, and I really like that. I really hate distros that require a username and password to log into a live session or to run an installer. If you're going to do that, though, at least make it easy for me to get the password. Have it in an obvious place, like have it in the boot screen when, hey, your password for this is Linux or root or whatever, or have it in a text file on the desktop. But if you can, just get rid of that that username and password requirement altogether in the live environment, and that's what Gecko Linux did, so props to them for taking care of that. Alright, the Calamaris installer. English has been chosen for our language. That's correct. I need to choose my time zone here. Click Next. Keyboard, English US has been chosen for the keyboard layout. I can test that out here in the test field. Keyboard is working as expected. Alright, partitioning, we have the option of erasing disk and letting Gecko Linux do what it wants to with my 15 gig hard drive of this virtual machine, or I can choose manual partitioning and set up the partitions myself. I'm going to choose erase disk, and I'm going to let Gecko Linux do whatever it wants to with this drive. Alright, username, I'm going to choose Gecko for my username. Password, I'm going to type a simple password. By default, log in automatically without asking for a password has been ticked on. I'm going to tick that off. I want to be asked for a password when I log in. Use same password for the administrator account. That is ticked on by default as well. I'm going to leave that ticked on. Basically, my home user, that password, and my root user password are going to be the same password. I like that. That way I don't have to remember two different passwords. We have our review screen here. Location is correct. Keyboard is correct. Partition scheme. Yeah, that looks correct. Alright. It's warning us it's about to format the drive and write to the disk. I'm going to click Install now. And the installer is probably going to run 5 to 10 minutes. I'll pause the video. Alright. The installer is completed. That took maybe 5 minutes. One complaint I always have about the Calamares installer. The Calamares installer is a fantastic installer. I really hate how they have Restart Now not ticked on by default, and they have it over here in the left corner of the screen, because most users, when they get to this point where it says all done, they naturally are going to go over here and click Done. That's going to close the installer. You're still going to be in the live environment. You haven't completed the installation yet until you restart the machine. They need to have this ticked on by default, and it needs to be in a more obvious place. Anyway, let me reboot the machine. Alright, we reboot our freshly installed Gecko Linux 423. Of course, it still says OpenSUSE Leap 42.3. Again, they really should fix some of the branding. Let's see how long it takes us to get to our login manager here. Alright, we got to the login manager very fast. The login manager here is LightDM. LightDM is a nice, lightweight login manager without a ton of dependencies. Alright, and the Cinnamon desktop loads. Took a few seconds for the Cinnamon desktop to load. We still get our little message about software rendering mode. Alright, I'm going to go through the Cinnamon menu here and show you what is installed by default on Gecko Linux 423. Alright, under accessories we have our archive manager. Let's see what archive manager they're actually using here. This is the GNOME archive manager. This is for zip files, .tar, gz, xz files. Alright, we have our calculator. We have Parcelite. We have Qt4 settings for the Qt toolkit. We have our screenshot utility. We have our text editor. Let's see what text editor they're using here. Under About, we have gedit 3.20.2, so they're using the standard text editor in the GNOME desktop environment. Looks like they're using a lot of GNOME utilities. Alright, we have Virtual Keyboard also under Accessories. Under Graphics, we have our Document Viewer, we have Gthumb, we have our Image Viewer, LibreOffice Draw, and Simple Scan. Simple Scan is a scanning utility. Under Internet, we have Firefox as our default browser. The version of Firefox we're using is the Firefox ESR. This is 52.5.3, 64-bit of course. Alright, also under Internet we have Pigeon, which is an instant messenger utility. Not too many people use instant messaging anymore, but for those of you that do, Pigeon is a pretty cool little program. Thunderbird is our email client. Transmission is our BitTorrent client. Transmission, the standard BitTorrent client in the GNOME desktop environment. Under Office we have Document Viewer. We also have LibreOffice, Calc, Draw, Impress, and Writer. You open up Writer. Right, about LibreOffice, let's see, version 5.3.5.2. So, LibreOffice is really one of the highlights of the free and open source community, really. Maybe one of the most popular free and open source software out there. Might be. Firefox is certainly a contender in that. Of course, Linux, the Linux kernel, is a contender in that too. Under sound and video, we have Clementine. Clementine is an excellent music player, one of my favorite audio players in Linux. Let's see what version of Clementine we're using. Clementine 1.3.1. Interesting, Clementine is a Qt program. It uses the Qt toolkit rather than the GTK toolkit. And they look like they were using a lot of GNOME apps, so I'm not sure why they didn't include Rhythmbox, which is a really nice music player as well, but and it's a GTK app. It's strange that they went ahead and went with Clementine. I mean, I love Clementine, but it's you would think they would stick with all GTK programs. Pulse Audio Volume Control is also included under sound and video. VLC is our video player. And VLC also uses the Qt toolkit, by the way. But VLC is probably the best video player available on Linux. And when you install VLC on your system, it also installs a lot of proprietary multimedia codecs you need. So it's one of the benefits of installing VLC is you get all those codecs you need too. So administration. Under administration, we have our sysconfig editor. We have a bootloader, date and time, the dconfig editor, disk utility, files. Files, I'm assuming, is Nautilus. This is the standard file manager in the GNOME desktop environment. It's Nautilus. No, it's Nemo. That's weird that it's still labeled as files in the menu. That's how GNOME labels Nautilus as files. I guess Cinnamon labels Nemo as files too. Also under administration we have firewall, fonts, gparted, hardware info, host names, HP device manager, install, remove software. Let me click on that one. Of course, to install and remove software, you have to be root. So let me enter the root password. And of course, this launches Yast. Yast is our graphical package management program. It looks like it automatically is going to check for an update as I launch it. And I'm just going to minimize this, get it out of the way. Shouldn't be much to update. Again, this particular release of Gecko Linux is 2 days old. So. Alright, also under administration we have kernel settings, language installer, mail server, printing, network, release notes, have our services manager, software management, software repositories, sudo, SUSE Studio Image Writer. That's a image like disk writer, thumb drive writer. System keyboard layout. We have our system monitor. Let's check out the system monitor. See what kind of resources we're using. Alright. Resource usage is kind of high. Of course, I have the Yast package manager going on in the background. So that's probably why the CPU is a little high. Memory usage is a little high too, using 1 gigs of 6 gigs that I gave it. But that's probably not a fair representation. Cinnamon is not the lightest desktop environment in the world, but when I had the package manager running, that was probably spiking things a little bit. Also under administration, we have our users and groups. We have our terminal. Let's see what terminal we're using by default. Let's see. The GNOME terminal. Again, they're usually mostly GNOME apps, with the exception of Clementine and VLC. Alright, we also have Yast under administration. Under preferences, we have preferences for accessibility, account details, applets, backgrounds, color, date and time, effects, network, notifications, system settings, themes, window tiling, windows, workspaces. Then we have this places category, which is basically it opens the file manager at certain points within our directory structure, documents, music, pictures, videos, and downloads. Alright, I'm going to right click on the desktop. I'm going to choose Change Desktop Background. Let's see what kind of wallpapers we're presented with by default. And it looks like the only wallpaper that we have is this one here. And I actually like the other wallpaper better. How do I get back to that one? I'm not sure where that green wallpaper lives on the system. Looks like I'm stuck with this one for now. You would think we would have a better selection of wallpapers, though. If you're going to take the time to install a lot of third-party software and stuff on the system, you can include a few, high-quality wallpapers, because the two wallpapers they included are not even, third-party wallpapers. They were wallpapers included on OpenSUSE anyway. I mean, if I move my head out of the way, this is the OpenSUSE logo here. So, Gecko Linux really could include a few wallpapers. Right, I'm going to choose desktop settings from this right-click menu on the desktop. Alright, and here we have some of the settings for our desktop icons. If I turn this on, we have a computer icon that appears on the desktop. I'm going to turn that off. I could also do a home icon, trash, mounted volumes, or network icons on the desktop. Alright, I'm going to go back down here to the menu. I'm going to open the menu, and this icon here is our system settings. This is our control center. It's where we have options for backgrounds, effects, fonts, themes. Let me check out themes. Alright, we have options for window borders. Let's see, we have a few different themes for window borders, but nothing special here. The default theme, the Numix theme, is certainly the most attractive one of the ones that are available. Icons. Faenza is our icon theme by default. The only other ones included are some of the default GNOME icon sets, which are not very attractive. So again, you would think if you're going to include, some third-party stuff, some extra drivers and whatnot, you would include, at least a couple of different themes to choose from, maybe a couple of different icon sets. A little disappointed in that. Alright, I'm going to go back to the menu here, and I'm going to type terminal just to quickly search for it. Open up the GNOME terminal here again. I'm going to do uname space dash R. Alright, 4.4.104 for kernel. That's not a real recent kernel, but it's not, ancient. And the last thing I'll do, I opened up the system monitor one more time just to check CPU and memory usage. Now that I'm not really running anything, the system monitor or the package manager is not running. Still doesn't help CPU though. CPU usage is really high. It's one of the things that I've always not liked about Cinnamon is it takes up a little bit too much CPU and memory for what it is. I mean, this is kind of an old school traditional Windows kind of paradigm. Your taskbar at the bottom, a menu, your start menu, and really lightweight desktop environments that do similar things like LXDE, LXQT, XFCE, Mate. They don't take near as much CPU and memory. It is taking 50% of both CPUs that I gave this virtual machine. That's crazy, because I'm not doing anything right now. The only thing that's running are the default whatever applets systems sessions that are running in the background. It's still taking almost 1 gig of memory. So that's a very large memory footprint for what's going on right now. Anyway, all in all, what's my thoughts of Gecko Linux? I'd actually never installed and reviewed Gecko before. The install was perfect. The Calamares installer is dead simple to run. Gecko Linux is basically OpenSUSE. OpenSUSE, with some proprietary drivers and codecs installed. VirtualBox guest editions, for example, just work out of the box in Gecko. So I definitely give Gecko Linux an A+. Check it out, guys. Peace.